Hey, Rent to Retires, it's Adam Schrader here with another episode, joined as usual by Zach Lee Master, the founder and CEO of Rent to Retirement. And we are pleased today to be joined by Rob Abasolo. He is with hostcamp.com. Rob, thanks for joining us.
Hello, ahoy. How's it going, fellas? Happy Monday or happy any day for any of the listeners at home that might be listening to this on a Tuesday through Sunday.
Today is just a great day for podcast listening. You're welcome, everybody.
Yes.
What energy Rob is bringing, like after hours, and we are recording this on a Monday. So, I mean, we've just always been impressed. How do you do that, Rob? How do you keep the energy up all the time?
You know what, man? My job is to look at cameras and be myself. And I do my best, whether the camera's on or off, to be the same person. I think most people would agree. I like it. I'm a talker. Give me a microphone and just let me talk. Give me a one-word suggestion, and I'll do an improv scene right now. Go. Just kidding. Listen, we're here to talk real estate. I'm excited.
Yeah, man. We're here to talk about your story and a little bit of bigger pockets, a little bit of your up and coming, all the cool things you're doing in short-term rental today. And that's something, as you know, that I have a personal interest in, and a lot of investors do. And I want to hear about like what's happening in the short-term world today. But let's get started by learning about like, where did you get started? We always want to ask about that first deal and like how that came to be, but if you could fit that in there, I mean, just tell us about Rob pre and beginning real estate investing.
Yeah, so I always like to preface this by saying I got into real estate investing because I was really broke and I didn't make a lot of money at my job, and I just was always looking for some kind of hustle, some kind of side hustle, some kind of little business I could start that would make me an extra $500 a month. That was a lot of money to me back in the day. I mean, it's still a lot of money, right? But like back in the day, I was a copywriter in advertising. My entry-level job was like $40,000 a year. And, I felt rich when I got the offer. And then, I started paying rent. I started paying student loans. I started paying credit cards. And then I realized I had no money left over. And so I was always this guy that was just looking to make money, to the point where friends always made fun of me. I was always like the deal guy, and they're like, "Oh, Rob, this typical cheap Rob, always just doing these things to make extra money." And I just had hustle. I knew I wanted to figure out how to make money, and I knew that real estate was kind of this thing. My dad always ingrained in me from a very early age that wealthy people buy real estate, and I didn't ever think I could get into real estate because it just seems like a behemoth of a thing to take down. You need a lot of money. But I actually found myself accidentally in this world of Airbnb because my wife and I had moved to LA, and we were renting this little apartment. It was like 660 square feet, $1,800 a month. That was actually $1,849 because they charged us $49 a month in pet rent. And I remember just not really wanting to pay rent to a landlord, and especially not pay pet rent. And so I told my wife, I was like, "Hey, let's buy a house in LA." And she was like, "Can we afford it?" And I was like, "No, but we're going to figure it out." And we bought a house. I was like, how can we afford is really the question that I asked. And there was really always the philosophy for me. Like, how can I sort of do stuff, buy things that other people would pay for, right? I was very into the sharing economy idea. And we buy this house in LA, 10 minutes away, and we still have this lease. And it was going to be like $2,000 to break the lease. And so I was like, I had heard about this website. You could put your stuff on it and rent your house to strangers, and they'd pay you every night. And of course, that back in the day was Airbnb as we know it. And I pitched that to my wife. I was like, "Look, we don't have the money to break the lease, but we'll just toss it on Airbnb and hopefully it'll pay the rent." And back then, Airbnb was still newish. This was 2017. It had been around for a while, but no one really knew what it was. And so I remember going to the leasing office and asking the leasing ladies. I was like, "Hey, yeah, do people Airbnb here?" And they're like, "Yeah, I think so. We see them all the time." I'm like, "And y'all don't care?" And they're like, "Oh, I don't know." And I was like, "Good enough for me." And so now I know.
Not a no.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly. It was not a no. And I was like, okay, well, in retrospect, they were obviously just making like 10, $12 an hour. They had no idea what they were doing. They had no idea that the owner of that complex would have been petrified that they had just given me pseudo permission to rent my property on Airbnb. But that really was my foray into that. And then the house that I bought 10 minutes down the road had a little 279 square foot studio underneath. And I had calculated, okay, if I rent that on Airbnb, I'll be able to make some money and hopefully supplement 50 to 75% of the mortgage, which was $4,400 at that time. And that's exactly what happened. It worked. It was crazy. And that's kind of like the condensed version. There's so many years and tears and pains and headaches that I didn't tell you, but that's the gist of it.
Attention landlords. Are you prepared for this year's peak rental season? If not, AVAIL is here to help you succeed. With AVAIL's comprehensive rental analysis reports, you can set a competitive price informed by detailed market analysis, including pricing trends and local demand. Find great renters quickly through easy-to-create online listings that are syndicated to 20 top rental websites. Review prospective tenants' applications online and screen instantly with TransUnion credit reports, background checks, and eviction history, all at your fingertips. Need a lease? AVAIL offers lawyer-reviewed templates specific to your state, ready to be signed online. Plus, streamline your rent collection by accepting payments through your tenant's preferred methods, ensuring everyone stays on track. Make 2025 your best rental year yet. Visit avail.co/rent to retirement today and get AVAIL Unlimited Plus for free for your first month. That's avail.co/rent to retirement.
Well, we want to unpack a little bit of that because you wouldn't be the man you are today without going through some challenges and tough times, right? That's just part of the game. I think people don't talk about enough sometimes. But just to get this straight, so your first deal was actually, I guess the correct term would be an arbitrage type of model, right? Where you like, so there was no long-term rentals, like you were straight into kind of the short-term game. I mean, it helped geographically where you lived, but that helped you essentially buy a house where you didn't have to pay rent. You didn't have to pay this pet rent. You got to own an asset and you didn't have to break the lease. That was kind of your first forte. I mean, what's the next after that? You're like, oh, this is sweet. I mean, you have the additional space that you're renting in your current place and you're just off to the races, or what's next after that?
So let's backtrack even before that. Like what really gave me my start in real estate to begin with was before we lived in LA, we lived in Kansas City, which is drastically cheaper. Surprise, surprise. And I had this little like $159,000 house that we bought that was so expensive for us. Again, $40K, my salary. I think my wife was also making, I think she had just started teaching. And so again, we're like, yes, we're about to double our salary. And then our credit cards hit and her student loans hit. We really didn't have that much money, right? And so there was this house, $159K. The mortgage was like $1,059. I'll never forget that figure because it was like the first, real mortgage I ever had. And we had this friend that was like thinking about moving to Kansas City. And I was like, dude, move to Kansas City. Come on, you got this. I helped him get a job at the ad agency that I worked at. I was like, I'll help you get a job and you can stay with us. I'll charge you like super cheap rent. And he was like, well, how much? And I was like, no, how about like $400, all bills paid. And he was like, yeah, sounds good. He moves in. I get that Venmo for $400. And I was just like, oh my goodness, I've done it. I've unlocked wealth to the nth degree. Other people paying my mortgage. Are you kidding me? And so that was really kind of like this whole like, man, you can buy stuff and really kind of figure out how to subsidize it in so many creative ways. And obviously that's a house hack. The term for me didn't exist. I didn't know what that was. This was pre-Bigger Pockets for me. And yeah, I mean, we were house hacking, living large. And that was sort of that first light bulb, like, okay, I can do things to control my mortgage that are outside of my job, meaning there's other ways I can make money. And to me, making money was renting out this room. This house goes and it appreciates in just the 2.5, 3 years that we lived there to $215,000, which is wild to me. And we sold that house, had about 40 grand. And basically that was like so much money. And that's how we moved to LA. And my wife was like, she was very responsible. She was like, hey, we have 40,000. And I was like, yeah. She's like, we have 80,000 in student loan debt and credit card debt. Should we just use the 40,000 to pay that off? And I was like, we could, but I think that there's something bigger meant for this money. And I don't know what it is. And so she was like, oh, come on, let's pay the student loan down. I'm like, listen, what you're saying makes logical sense, but I was like, I just need to have that in the bank account. and I need to figure something out with it. And so when I bought that house in LA, I still had this mindset of like, what can I buy and how can other people pay for it? We used that little nest egg to buy our property in LA. We did an FHA loan, 3.5% on a $624,000 house. And same thing. I convinced a friend to move to LA and live in our room. And I was like, hey, buddy, $800. This is going to be great. I'm going to build a tiny house in the backyard because I had already rented that studio downstairs. And I was like, man, I'm making $2,000 to $3,000 downstairs. Now I'm renting a bedroom to my buddy. And if I build a tiny house in the backyard, an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU, then I can pay for it that way. And so I tell him like, dude, it'll take like 3-4 weeks to crush this thing out. It'll cost me like $20,000. And he was like, all right. And I can just stay in your guest room. I was like, yeah, man, it'll be fast.
So,
yeah,
you're proof. First of all, I'd like to point out that Midwestern houses do appreciate over time. So that's one thing to acknowledge. Maybe slower, but
proof.
Yeah. And also, I don't know why you need to find tenants because you apparently have these friends that just follow you around wherever you go.
I am very good at convincing people to move to cities with me.
So Rob the Deal Guy has $40K of equity that he cashed in. His wife was gracious enough to let him not gamble with that money, but just earmark it for some other business ventures. What would your advice be to Rob? Because we get this question all the time, right? It's kind of like a lot of professional people that come out of school, they have this student loan debt, the interest rate is whatever it is on that. And the question is always like, I know it's an individual basis, but do you pay that debt down or do you invest with that capital? In my mind, I'm always thinking like, and this is the same with cars or whatever else, like let my assets pay for my liabilities, including some loan debts, like just interest arbitrage. If I can make 8 or 10% on that consistently, reliably, then, and I have like whatever, 5% student loan interest, like that kind of makes sense, right? Like let the cash flow pay. I mean, but what would you recommend in that scenario for someone that also would be in your situation?
Ultimately, I think the catalyst for all real estate wealth is getting out of your mortgage as fast as possible. And that doesn't mean like paying it down. It just means how can you figure out how to pay as little as possible for your living expenses? Because if you can save that amount of money, it's the ultimate compounding interest in my mind. I mean, for me, I was living in LA, renting that apartment. I then moved to a house that is more than double the price. That apartment was making $1,000 to $2,000 profit every month. That was really great for me. I was like, oh, hey, this is cool. I move into that house. That studio under the house is making $2,000 to $3,000. And so now, between that and that little arbitrage that I had, I was not paying this $4,400 mortgage. And so the way I look at it is I'm now making $4,400 a month and I'm saving $50,000 a year in living expenses. That $50,000 a year is $100K the next year, $150K the next year. That to me is like the ultimate. And so when someone's like, how do I get into real estate? What do I do? I only have $30,000. Is it too late for me? I'm like, dude, house hack, buy a house, 3.5%. You're going to be uncomfortable, a little awkward. You'll have some roommates. You got to put your pride aside. Like we're not trying to get rich right now. We're trying to get rich eventually or wealthy eventually. And sometimes it just takes sacrificing that short-term comfort for long-term gain. And so for me, I don't know what that answer is. It is preference and definitely like what's your investment philosophy. But I can't imagine a better way to supercharge wealth than house hacking and getting out of, subsidizing your mortgage dramatically.
90% of real estate investors miss key tax savings by overlooking deductions. Flipping houses, managing rentals, or growing your real estate empire? Make sure you've got experts in your corner, especially when it comes to taxes. That's why we turned to Nevada Corporate Headquarters, the experts who help us reduce taxes and set up our real estate LLCs. With 35 plus years of experience and 17,000 five-star reviews, Nevada Corporate Headquarters helps you manage properties across states, navigate tax laws, and protect your assets, all with a real estate LLC. Visit nchinc.com/RTR to schedule a free real estate LLC formation and tax consultation. Plus, receive a free guide to safeguarding your assets. You, as you're talking about your investments here, you've been fairly open. Whenever I was reading some of your articles, you talk about times where your investments, let's just say, didn't go quite as planned. Um, Talk a little bit about how you kind of work through that, what you learned from it, whether you just, I mean, it doesn't sound like you just cut bait and run on some of these. You kind of work through it. Talk about your mindset as you approach deals, because we have so many investors who come to us and they're like, oh, I bought this one property and it hasn't performed exactly like I wanted, so I'm just going to sell. It's been 10 months and it's not stabilized like I want it to be. I'm just going to sell.
Mm.
Obviously, not exactly the mindset that one needs to have if you're going to be a successful investor. So how do you get over that?
Yeah, so the easiest thing to do when a property is not performing is to sit around and complain. And the hardest thing to do is to reinvest back into your property. The reason is we want to find a fault in the system. We want to find something to point the finger at that isn't us. It's rare that someone says, I bought a bad deal. They usually say, let's just put it in the lens of Airbnb. Usually people say, oh, the Airbnb bust. Oh, market saturation. Oh, regulations. Oh, like people just don't get it. They don't understand the concept. Really, what actually happened is they probably just didn't analyze the deal correctly. Now, the hard thing to do when you're in this bad deal is to say, okay, it didn't work. Now I've just got to put 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 into it to get it to work. And that's where most people are like, oh, are you kidding me? I'm bleeding right now. You're telling me you want me to put more of my savings into the sinking ship? And unfortunately, that kind of is the answer sometimes. Now, you don't have to spend $50K. I mean, I have a lot of properties where a $500 investment yielded crazy results, and I'll kind of walk you through that. But I think if you ever have a performing or a bleeding asset, it's not about can you sell it? It's more about can you fix it? Fixing it is always cheaper than selling it. You think about the 6%, 7% fees and closing costs and realtor fees and all that stuff. That's a very expensive thing to sell, especially if you're going to take a loss. I mean, if you're going to sell a property and lose 10, 20, 30 grand anyways, it's so much easier to just try to fix it. And so I've got properties that I bought. I didn't analyze them correctly. And I've learned over time the method. I've got a pretty bulletproof method now, I'd say. But like I've just figured it all out the hard way. And it's simple little things. I think the main thing that someone could do in the Airbnb space, for example, to fix their property is take better photos. And the crazy thing is to me that most of the time investors tend to mail it in once they've already kind of set up the property or put down that initial down payment. They're kind of like, all right, I closed on it. Hard part's over. Not really. Hard part is like actually operating that business. And so what I'll see is investors will buy this $500,000 house. They'll spend $20,000, $30,000 on furnishings. They'll hire the contractor, the cleaner, the pest control, pool maintenance. They'll do everything. They'll check every box. Okay. They'll spend on a $500,000 house, 20% down payment, 100 grand. So 150, they can put $150,000 into this property. And then they're like, all right, I could spend $200 or $300 on a photographer, but I've got an iPhone 16. So I'm going to skimp on that part. And so they take cell phone photos and then they're like, Rob, my property's not booking. What do you think it is? And it's kind of like, yeah, of course. Like you loaded the bases and then you just kind of like threw the bat on the floor and walked away. Like that to me is how I see Airbnb in most cases when someone's bleeding is they either mailed it in or they just bought badly and they don't want to fix it. And I think for me, when I see something wrong in my properties, it's rarely economical. I can't say for certain any of my kind of bleeding properties or failing properties that I've ever had were an economical thing or an Airbnb bust thing. I think every property that I've gone in and actively worked to fix, I was able to do so because I just reinvested 10, 20, 30, 40K back into it. And I think a lot of investors have this, if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality, meaning they'll set up a property. Hey, it kind of works. They never reinvest into it. Then it is broke and they still don't fix it. And then they're broke. And so it's just kind of like a funny psychology of investors need to get much better at reinvesting back into their property. That's going to always yield significantly higher results than going out and buying a new property. Like 9 times out of 10. For me, 10 times out of 10.
Yeah, and I love what you said about just the way of looking at problems. I mean, because this is just part of the game, right? And sometimes newer investors, I think, and we get this sometimes too with people buying, turnkey or new construction. It's like God forbid there's a repair or something unforeseen or a tenant issue. And like, that just happens, and you just have to deal with it. There's always a solution when there's an issue, and often multiple solutions. You just have to be open and receptive to be looking for those, right? And then, go through the challenging times. But often I also think that if you just hold the property long, like, get it stabilized, and if you just hold it long enough, like, that's just going to be a blip in time, right? And sometimes some of those underperforming years, I mean, you could have a and this has been so true of some of our assets. I know, Adam, we've shared stories about some of these too, where it's like, this was such a problem property for the first 1 or 2 years for whatever reason. And then it's been like one of the best performing assets over time. But you just got to find those issues, solve them, and then hold on to them over time. But with short-term rentals, I think it's even more appropriate. Like, it's a business, right? You need to, even way more than any other asset class. I truly believe that. Commercial, it's just, you really got to hone in, and the pictures, the whole operations. Even if there's not a problem, like, you got to keep up with competition. You have to keep up with things, and
that's the hardest thing. That is the hardest thing, is keeping up with competition. You have to keep in mind, like, the way that you analyze a property whenever you're looking at, let's say, Airbnb. Obviously that's what I do, so I'm always going to cite that. But, like, let's just think about how you actually analyze that property. You are analyzing how much a property is going to make based off of your competition. Meaning, you look at all the top competitors, you say, okay, here's what number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is doing. If I take these components of it, I can beat them. Well, what people don't realize is that people are doing that to you. Yeah. You launch your property, and now they're stealing from you to beat you. And if 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people do that, guess what? You went from being top 5 to top 15. And that's a big difference for people. And then they're not making money. They're not booking. And they're like, oh, like, oversaturation, which there, I guess, is a case. But all you really have to do is go back into the comps and say, okay, well, hey, everyone has stolen or taken from my ideas. Now I got to one up it. And now maybe I have to add a hot tub to my property. Maybe I should add a sauna. Maybe I should add a pickleball court. But I think the problem that I see often in short-term rentals is that I think investors get a little greedy with their money. Meaning, I think they make money and then they say, woo, yeah, I'm making $2-3 a month. Let's go. And they start spending it. Whereas my philosophy is a bit of a hot take. And it's like, you should never spend your real estate money. You should never count on that for your living expenses. I know it sounds sexy on TikTok to be like, make $10K a month on Airbnb, live on a beach. I'm like, no, man. It's like, your Airbnb is, all of real estate in general is a piggy bank. Airbnb just happens to be like a more, like, a faster paced piggy bank. And you should take that money, build up the piggy bank, and then reinvest it back in, and just keep doing that. And then whenever you've really optimized a property, then you can go buy another property and start taking some chips off the table. But everyone takes chips off the table too soon. And when things go south, there's no chips to, like, reinvest back into the property. And so it's like, it feels just so simple in the moment to point the finger at, like, the doom and gloom of the economy, in my opinion.
Real estate is a piggy bank. I love that, Rob. We're going to quote you on that. Actually, our logo here is a house with the guy.
I was going to say, if only someone had a visual representation of that.
I love it. This podcast, by the way, is brought to you by Rent to Retirement /Rob Built. You get something when you go there.
We'll get something for him. The memoirs of Rob's Airbnb story.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get back to your story, because I want to hear. So, all right, first few deals, you kind of, like, got into this arbitrage almost by accident, but also necessity of just ways to afford a house, and then you didn't stop there. You were more creative. You got some more streams of income. You somehow convinced your friends to come out here and rent these places from you and live with you, which, I don't know if your wife was fully on board with that or not. My friends were definitely could not live close to me. But what's next from there? Did you continue down the path of all short-term rentals? It sounds like you're doing a lot of different things. So let's talk, Rob, like, post those first few deals, into the next years of investing, and still pre-BP.
Yeah. So this really is, like, it's kind of crazy how successful the idea worked. And let me just be really clear. It was all on accident. It wasn't like I figured this out, and I didn't have a grand plan. I just had the benefit of appreciation on my side. And I will always just say, you mentioned something about, like, these properties not working, a blip in the future, or they're like a blip in time. Everyone looks like a genius 30 years from now. If you invest in real estate today, people will look at you and they're gonna be like, oh my God, you're the smartest, most, like, insane investor I've ever heard of. And, like, that's kind of how I feel sometimes when I tell my story, because I'm like, listen, what I'm about to say, purely an accident. I came in at a great time in the economy. Never going to act like I did it. So, but I still did it. That's the thing.
And in 30 years, you will take credit for it.
Well, that's the key, though, right? Is it not? Because yes, it could be all accidental, but like accidents don't happen if you're taking action. It's just you being an opportunistic person, right? And
Exactly.
So, anyways, go on.
Okay, so all right, so here's what happens. I build this tiny house in my backyard. You remember this one that was going to cost 20 grand? It was going to take 2 weeks. Cut to you basically 14 months later. I have a tiny house in my backyard, and it wasn't 20 grand. It was 74,000, and I was up to my eyeballs in credit card debt because I thought it was going to cost way less and be a lot faster. But here's the good news. I did this little tactic called forced appreciation. I added so much equity to my property, and I didn't really understand that could happen. I was like, whoa, hold on. My property is worth how much now? And so what I did was I was able to cash out, refi, pay off like a good chunk of that debt. And then I had this beautiful thing that was like a HELOC, a home equity line of credit.
So just to clarify, you had an ADU that you built, but it increased the value, of course, of your overall residence, right? Could you walk through the economics of that a little bit, if you would?
Yeah, for sure. So if you think about how the value of real estate in general, you're valued per square foot, right? And so let's say you're in LA, is probably like $400 a square foot, I think, off the top of my head. And the way that you can add value to your property is by increasing the square footage. So I built an accessory dwelling unit, basically another house in the backyard, and I added 400 square feet to my property value. You multiply that times $400 or whatever the average square foot price is, and that's how much value I forced into the kind of valuation of my property just based on the average sale price in the neighborhood.
Cool. Yeah. So like if it was 400 per square foot and you added 400 feet, that's 160,000. Whatever, you built it for 74, even though it's significantly more than you anticipated, and you had almost 100K in equity that you created. So all right, continue on with that.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly what happened. So I do a cash out refi, meaning I go to the bank and I say, hey, I've added a value to my house. Can I get 75% of that equity cashed out? And they say yes. So I'm able to kind of pay off some of the credit card debt that I had. And not only that, but I also had a home equity line of credit, and I was able to take out a credit line on that equity that was in my property. And this home equity line of credit was like a 90% LTV, meaning I could take 90% of the equity that I had in that house, which came out to about $120,000. Pretty significant. So, of course, I figured out this cheat code, and I'm renting that back house, by the way. This is all during COVID. I kind of launched during COVID and was thinking, oh my gosh, like my business is over. And then all of a sudden, midterm rental just snapped into place. I started renting to nurses, started making like $2,000, $3,000 a month with midterm rentals, and just being like, oh my gosh, like I did it. Like not only am I paying my mortgage, I'm making money now, right? This was like a special time for me. So I had really felt like I uncovered just, I don't know, some secret thing. I was just like, I can't believe that this is real. And I
found the cheat code.
I found the cheat code to financial like freedom, and it was real estate. And I basically get to this point where I'm like, man, I got $120,000 as a credit line. What can I do with this? Like, how could I take this and do more real estate? How can I build more tiny houses that print $2,000 to $3,000 a month? And I had heard about Joshua Tree, which is about 2.5 hours outside of LA. And I knew it was kind of like a cool place. And I knew that people like LA Angelinos would go out and spend a lot of money, and just like a prime place for influencers to take photos and for hippies to go out and do shrooms. It's just a popular place, right? This is like pre the boom. And lots were also like $12,000. So I bought this lot in Joshua Tree for $12,000. And I had $120,000 HELOC, and the house that I wanted to build was basically a replica of the one that I built in my backyard, but I needed about 40 grand to get it done. So I go to my parents and I say, hey, I've got this idea. If y'all kick in 40 grand, I'm going to build this house in Joshua Tree, and I will make you a 50% partner, and I will put in the other 120 or 125. And the reason I did that, it was a really good deal for them, because my parents sacrificed everything for me. I love them very much. They moved from Mexico. They immigrated here. My dad was a doctor in Mexico. He gave up his medical license to basically live here. And he tried to get his medical, translation, whatever, like reciprocity. He could never do it. And the test was really expensive. And after failing the test 2 or 3 times, he was just like, well, I can't keep doing this. I gotta go out and make money for the family. And the rest of his career, he basically made minimum wage, up until he retired. And I think when he retired, he was making like 40, 50,000. Right. And to him, that was like a lot. I remember he looked at me and he said, he's like, son, I did it. Like I'm living large here. I'm making $40,000. And, it was a lot to him, but for me, it was always very I don't know, hard to see my dad not living up to the potential that I knew he had, And so I take that's very emotional for me, because they gave so much for me. So I was just like, okay, I'm going to help these guys retire. That's my plan as a real estate investor. That really kind of played into my why. And so when I pitched them this idea, horrible deal for me, but I was like, I guess they did sacrifice everything for me. I could throw them a bone here. And so they believed in me. They gave me a $40,000 loan from what the small nest egg that they had. And I built this house in Joshua Tree for $165,000. And I was able to do that with their cash, with my cash. And, I had to then go to the bank and say, hey, I built this asset. Will you cash me out? And I had to do 3 separate appraisals because they just couldn't believe that this property was worth, what the appraisers were saying.
Because this is a tiny house, right? There's like
Tiny
400, yeah. Okay.
303 square feet. And
Yeah.
the appraisals kept coming in really high because the appraisers got it. They understood what I was going for. And the bank was like, I don't know about that one. Let's do another one. I don't know about that one. Let's do another one. And so finally on the third one, the appraisal came in for $222,000. 75% of that is $165K. I got all the money back, and I was able to pay off my HELOC, pay off my parents. And I had discovered this concept of free houses. Like I was like, man, I could just buy houses, or I could just build houses and cash them out. It's a free house. Now, granted, when I say that on YouTube, people are like, well, how's it free if you still pay a mortgage? How dare you say free? But for me, it is. I mean, I'm just like, I got my money back. Infinite return. If that house makes money, awesome. If it breaks even, I don't care. I got it for free in my mind. And so that was kind of a big turning point for me where I'm like, man, I could build stuff and I could start doing that. And that kind of led into, to more, builds and more Airbnbs.
What gave you that confidence? I mean, is it just like everything goes my way type thing, or kind of have you always had this built-in confidence that you can just, figure things out and make it happen?
For me, I think I wouldn't even say it's confidence. It's probably naivete, as they say. Young, and I don't know. I do feel like if there's one thing that I know that I'm good at, is that I become so obsessive about the things that I want. And if I want something, I just will not sleep. I will not stop talking about it. I will not stop reading about it until I just figure out every angle and go for it. And it's one of those things that is super endearing to my wife, but it's also like one of those things that's super annoying because she's just like, just do it. It's fine. You don't have to pitch me on this. Like, just go for it. I'm just like, when I want something, I cannot settle for not having it, right, in the world of real estate. And so I think I just figured out that this extra $1,000 to $2,000 that I could make from Airbnb was just such a big deal. And the reason I say that is because I don't know, it gets into the bigger philosophy in real estate, which is everyone's way too trigger happy to quit their job. And my philosophy is that quitting your job won't make you happier. I think the reason people think that quitting their job is going to make them happier is because they're not making enough money for their job. But if they could just have the stability of what their job provides and then make an extra $2,000 a month, that $1,000 to $2,000 is really what unlocks happiness. They say money can't buy happiness. I think $1,000 to $2,000 a month does, because it allows you to go eat sushi with your wife and get salmon nigiri. It allows you to go to Chipotle and get the guac. It allows you
But guacamole extra.
exactly. It's like, hey, that $2.77, no big deal, right? You can buy that extra pair of shoes if you want. You can get a car. It doesn't matter. But $1,000 to $2,000 is basically your house money. It's things that you can buy that you don't have to worry about sacrificing your salary for. This real estate money lets you kind of do these little fun things. And so for me, I was making $1,000 to $2,000, and I could take my wife out. It was the first time, right? Like I paid student loans, and that helped too. That was like the first big check mark. But like when I could just take my wife and say, hey, instead of us getting like 4 pieces of nigiri, let's get 10. Let's do it. Let's live large, you know? And I think when I figured out that $1,000 to $2,000 a month was achievable, I was just like, okay, how do I make 3 to 4? How to make 4 to 5? How do I make, 5 to 6? And that was to me, like, really the big thing is like, I figured out the formula. How can I clone it over and over and over and over again? And that's really what I have spent the most of my career figuring out, is like, how do I clone my past success? And it gets harder the more you make, but when you're getting started, it's really not that hard, I don't think.
Yeah. So that first deal is like proof of concept that, sure. I mean, give you the confidence. You're a little obsessive and I would say determined to get things done. But I mean, yeah, after you kind of have that proof of concept, it's like, let's repeat it, right? It's all replication. And it's not, I mean, I think for a lot of newer investors, it may seem daunting in whatever avenue you're going into and investing. But if you're someone who can just get through it and do it and figure it out, and then you kind of like, yes, you can tweak it each time, but you have the framework, right? And then it's just go out and do more of that. I love real estate so much in any capacity because all of these stories, every single person we speak to is like, to some degree, and Rob, you jumped a little bit heavier into it, but I mean, real estate usually starts out as a side hustle. And it's so easy to be something that you can do a few hours a week or a day and just you can engineer it to be whatever you want it to be. And then that also gives you the security to be able to play around with it, not as your main source of income, and eventually do that if you want to go down that path, but you never have to. But I think that's super interesting to hear. Rob, let's talk about those deals. So those tiny houses, you got this land dirt cheap in Joshua Tree.
Yeah.
And you built a house on it. Turned out well. How was the rental economics on that? And let's talk about, okay, what happened from there? Because I would imagine that you did more of these and then you had crazy appreciation as that became more popular, and like walk us through that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that first year, so my mortgage on this property, mind you, is like $900 a month. So I think that first year I did $78,000 on that little tiny house, in gross revenue. So you subtract like mortgage, cleaning fees, all that stuff. I think I was doing like $4,000 or $5,000 a month in profit that first year. Now, that was the travel boom and COVID, and things were crazy. It's only gone down since then. Let me just say that. Like, I think the first year was 78, second year was 55, third year was 38. Still profitable at 38. Obviously, my mortgage is nothing.
It's a free house.
Yeah, free house. But that's where we get back into my philosophy of, okay, well, most people would say Joshua Tree is dead. Oh my gosh, oversaturation. It's very clear to me how to fix that. I know how I can make $60,000, $70,000 again. I just have to do it. And my parents are like, hey, now I've paid my parents back. It's really cool. I get to wire them money, $2,500, like, pretty often. I've sent them a good chunk of change. Now they're like, hey, how do I do this again? So we're talking about like what I can do. We might add a pool. We might add some amenities, reinvest into the backyard. But that first year though, I was flying real high there because I was just like, oh my gosh, $78,000 on a, $10,000 mortgage a year. This is crazy. And what ended up happening was I ended up posting about Airbnb. Like, I talked about it. I was like, hey, this is what I do. Like, look at me, I'm staging this house. And I was in LA at the time, and I was in improv at UCB, and I'll never forget. So we were going around the first day of class introducing ourselves, and everyone's like, hi, I'm John, I'm a poor actor, and hi, I'm Janet, I'm a starving model, and like everyone was just kind of naming off all their things that they were doing in LA, and I was like the last one. I was like, hey, I'm Rob Abasolo, I'm a copywriter in advertising, and I invest in Airbnbs. And everyone was just like, what are you doing here? Like they were like, why are you in here? You're not like us. And I kind of felt weird, I was like, oh yeah, maybe it is a bit insensitive to talk about wealth building in this room. But we did a show and we bombed. And we went to a bar to celebrate afterwards because that's what you do. And a guy in my class walked up to me and said, "Hey, dude, I heard you think about the real estate stuff. That's really cool." And I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Yeah, man. It's like, I got a lot of money. He's like, I've got some money saved up. Dude, I'll fund it if you just teach me how to do this. Like, can we do that again?" And I was like, yeah. And so we built a house 2 or 3 minutes away from that tiny home. He funded the whole thing. He brought the borrowing power. We got the new construction loan through his name. And we built it for $275,000. And I think when it was done a year later, and we sold it for $675,000. So we made a $400,000 profit. And again, mind-blowing amount of money there. And we didn't really take any chips off the table. We 1031'd it into a bunch of different properties, and we're still partners to this day on stuff. But that was kind of like a first big, like, okay, now not only can I buy and cash out and get my money back, I can also buy and sell and make large gobs of cash. And then I had another friend that reached out and they said, "Hey, I keep seeing you post about Airbnb. Can we invest with you? Or like, how does that work?" And I was like, "Oh, you don't," or they were like, "Can you tell us about it? Can we like pick your brain on it?" I was like, yeah, sure. So I called them and they were like, "Okay, well, can you help us?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, sure. I'll give you two options. One, like, you can pay me to consult you." And they're like, "Well, what would that look like?" And I was like, "Yeah, you pay me $50 an hour and I'll just like tell you whatever you want to know." And I was like, "Or since we're friends, I can just help you. Just text me and I'll just tell you whatever you need." And then they're like, "Can we just pay for it and then partner up on it?" And I was like, I mean, free house. Sure. Why not? And so the next series of homes that I had purchased after this were partnerships with other people. They saw, this was, by the way, before Rob Built. The Rob Built YouTube cool guy with the hair did not exist. This was just me talking to like my friends on Instagram and my Facebook. They were like really intrigued by it. And so I just had people that would reach out and like offer to invest, like it was just always weird to me. I'm like, "Me? You want to give me money?" I was like, "I guess, let's do it." And funny story, I remember those partners. They're still my partners on that house. We bought a house in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. But I posted a post on the Bigger Pockets forums asking for help. And I was like, "Hey, I've got these friends. They want to invest with me. How should I structure the JV to protect them and this and that?" And all these people commented and they're like, "Wow, you're so dumb. Like, why would you ever do that? Why would they do that? Why would they ever believe in you?" And they just like ripped me to shreds. And I was like, "Oh man, what the heck? I thought I was being nice. I wanted to show integrity. What do you mean?" That post, by the way, if you go and look up my profile on Bigger Pockets, it's still in there. I never deleted it because I want everyone to go. I hope those guys go back and read that post and be like, "Uh-oh,
Yeah.
we poked the wrong bear."
Showed you.
Yes. But yeah, so I scaled my portfolio through partnerships. And the reason I tell the story is none of this was crazy scientific. There was no insane ingenuity here. I didn't like, put out billboards. I just talked about it on social media, like to my 500 followers that were my friends, and on Facebook, who I'm friends with, like my mom's friends, right? And I think anyone can really land that investment or that first partner just by talking about the stuff that they do, the stuff that they're passionate about. And I was able to really kind of scale up from there and just kind of raise money and continue to buy houses.
The money found you. And this is like, I can relate to a lot of this in some of the early deals that I did, of just being a little bit outside of your comfort zone and charismatic and just talking about what you're doing, right? I mean, being in a room that has nothing to do with real estate investors, that you just threw that little plug, like, "This is what I'm doing." And you got your first non-family investor from that. I mean, it's just, I think about that from time to time, just like, you got to put it out there what you're doing, right? Even if you're a newer investor, if you're passionate about, like, don't be afraid to talk about it publicly. I mean, do you share that same piece of advice to people when they're first getting started, or what do you tell people about like how to talk about what they want to do?
You just got to do it, man. You got to put yourself out there. Like, I think the chances, it's really the same concept with real estate. I mean, like, people are like so scared to make an offer and make offensive offers. And I'm just like, okay, so let's just talk about the statistical probabilities here. If you make 0 offers on 0 houses, it is statistically impossible for an offer to be accepted, right? If you make 1,000 offers, there's a statistical chance, like a high chance, that you'll get one accepted. Now, even if none of them got accepted, it's still infinitely more statistically probable that one would over never making an offer, right? And it's the same thing with like putting yourself out there and talking about your story on social media or to your network. If you don't ever say the words, I'm a real estate investor, anywhere in the ether, like in conversation, written on forums, to your Facebook or social media, it is literally impossible for anyone to know that that is something that you do. And so the more you can kind of sprout those seeds around, you got to water them, continue to talk about it. You got to be annoying about it. But the most successful people I know are annoying, right? Like you just got to be okay with being annoying. But hopefully if you're likable and you've got integrity and you've got some kind of charismatic attribute about yourself, people will come to you. People will approach you. There's a lot of dumb money out there. And there's a lot of people that have money that they're just like, I wish I could do something with this large pile of money. I guess I'll put it in this 5% high yield savings account. And they would rather make a 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 15% return, but no one's approached them yet, or no one's made themselves loud enough in their circle.
Yeah, and they're not going to do the work, right? They're the easy. They're looking for a Rob Abasolo to go out there and create the opportunity for them. So
the more I get into this, the more I become that person, by the way. You know, it's like, I never thought that. I've always been the deal guy, right? I'm like finding the deals. And the more your wealth grows and the more your real estate empire grows, you're just begging for a deal. You're just like, can someone send me a deal? Make this easy for me, please. Right. And that's the transition. I think if you look at it kind of a slider schedule, like, or a slider diagram on the left side, like, cash flow is super important. Appreciation is like super on the far end of that. And like your sliders on the cash flow side of things at the beginning of your journey. But as you scale up and as you grow, you're able to sacrifice that cash flow and put more appreciation towards appreciation, because you're just like, hey, look, I'm fine with making a smaller return as long as the appreciation is there. And it's the same thing with capital and time. Like if you look at that slider, at the beginning of your journey, you have a lot of time, no capital. At the end of your journey, you have a lot of capital, no time. And so the older you get or the more experience you get, the less your time, or the more important your time becomes. And so you're just down to just kind of give up shares of whatever project people bring to you.
You mentioned when you were talking about your Joshua Tree income just kind of dropping. We've seen obviously some softening after post-COVID and all of that. What did, how have you had to adjust your strategy, or how have you seen investors have to adjust their strategies now that we are off that, massive COVID high that we were on?
Yeah, for sure. So here's kind of like small things that I've done. And I think it's really the era that we're entering is like the amenities era on Airbnb. I think it's no longer a niche where you're just putting a bed in or a mattress inside of a room and then saying like, all right, rent my house. Like for a long time, that was a standard. And then it was like upscaled, like nicer design, and everyone was going to Target and IKEA, and everyone's place looked exactly the same. And now it's even nicer than that. And professional photography is just kind of like the entry point. And that's why I've started Funkin Interiors, my interior design company, which is like even above that, because right now the people that actually succeed are the people with exceptional design, exceptional amenities. And so you can't go into Airbnb thinking, oh, I'm just going to like put in some furniture and hope it works. Like you really do have to find a demographic or a avatar or a niche that you can serve and hit that right on the head. And so for me, I've gone in and tried to figure out, what can I do with all my different properties that might appeal to a specific avatar? I'll give you an example of a property recently that I purchased. And, I purchased it 2 or 3 years ago, $250,000 house. Was not actually doing that great, to be honest. We were making a profit, but $500,000 a month. That's not nothing, but I had investors on that deal. And like, I had obviously hoped for more. And that property last year did $46,000 in 2023. Well, I obviously want to have a good reputation with my investors. And so I'm like, okay, how can I fix this? So we completely rebranded that property. That property is in College Station, Texas, so home of A&M. We called it the Game Day House. We added a pickleball court. We added an A&M mural. We added a game day mural. We added a cowboy tub with a deck around it. A fire pit that had a neon sign that said
cowboy tub being a watering
a horse trough. Yeah,
trough, right?
Horse trough.
Sure. Please continue.
Fancy for photos, right? Like people love it's really a dip pool is kind of the easy way.
Great in Texas for sure. Go on.
For sure. And so this kind of all this revamp that I'm talking about was a $36,000 revamp that I put in the majority of the money for. I didn't ask the investors for it. I said, hey, you know what? Let me take care of this. Y'all put in, the initial $75,000 that I took to buy it. I would like to, and they were putting in the pressure. They were fine with that, the return they were getting. But I was also like, look, I'm giving them all the money. I'd like to make some. So, selfishly, I was just like, let me just dump into this and see what I can do. So I invested $36K into it. And in the last, October? So we launched it in June. So we have about 5 months under our belt. We've increased our revenue $10,000. So what's interesting about this was that our profit already was like $5,000. And we've already covered expenses. We've already covered utilities, AC. Those expenses aren't really going to change. So every dollar that we can add to the top line pretty much goes into our pocket. Maybe an additional cleaning fee here and there. So when you increase your revenue after you're profitable, $10,000, what you're doing is you're increasing your profit basically $10,000. So if we were at a profit of $5,000 and now we're at a profit of $15,000, we've gotten a 200% increase in our profitability. And that's just now, right? Like I still have two more months in this year to increase profitability another $5,000-10,000, which is significant. Where it starts getting interesting is 2025. Last year we did 46K. We're currently at 57K. I think in 2025 we're probably gonna do like 80. So we will take our profitability from like, 5,000-7,000, something like that, to like $35,000.
So lesson learned in that one is to cater to an audience, right? Especially if you're having more competition, if things aren't working out, like find a niche, work within that, and really brand according to that. I have a lot I want to pick your brain about on short-term rentals, and we want to talk about the cool things you're doing with HostCon and everything right now. We want to be conscious of your time, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about BP. So tell us what led Rob to your experience on BP, and then maybe just real quickly we'll move into like all the cool things we're doing right now, and we have like a lightning round of short-term stuff for you.
Nice. Yeah. So I was asked back when I was living in Tennessee, which we didn't talk about that. I moved to Tennessee to build a tiny house village. I was a guest on their show in July. Bucket list moment for me. A bucket list moment for every investor, right? And I was just like, oh, my dream came true. I can't believe it. Like, this is crazy. Cloud9. And, a couple months after that, I got approached by HDTV to do a pilot. And around that time, BP reached out and they said, hey, Brandon's leaving. Would you be interested in maybe coming in and backfilling? And I was like, what? What do you mean? Me? Why? Who? I'm not like Brandon. I'm like much smaller. And they're like, we know, but that's what we like about you. You're going to be up and coming. It's great. Are you interested? I was like, yeah. So like, all right, well, we're going to interview a bunch of different people, audition different people. And, we'll let you know. And so they had me on a couple of shows, and I guess apparently I did well. They picked me, and they actually offered me the job about, I think within the same day or within like the next day of HDTV passing on my pilot. And I was really happy about it. Like I was really happy about HDTV passing because the bigger pockets opportunity was a much larger opportunity for me. And I did that for about 2.5 years. Recently, as of the last, I think 2 months ago, I left bigger pockets. They're great. We're still on good terms for the most part. They decided to go in a different direction, and now I'm kind of living life in a different, like I've got so much more time now, I feel like, and I'm like pursuing a lot of really interesting things on my end. And I think this next year is going to be pretty wild for me, to be honest.
That's awesome, man. And we all love seeing you on BP, as I told you when I last saw you, like carry an energy with you, and just being like super supportive of the newer investors coming up. I think that's what really Bigger Pockets was intended for initially. And, so we just wanted to say thank you for all that you contributed there. And I have to ask you, because that's an interesting place to be in. You're already impacting a lot of people's lives, being the main host in Bigger Pockets. Now you're famous for all intents and purposes, especially in the real estate and business space.
I'm a fame-ish, Yeah.
You're I'm sure that helped to, bring a lot more awareness about all the cool things about Rob to more people. But I'm curious from the interview side. I know it's probably stressful doing the podcasts and being structured, but you also probably got to interview a lot of really interesting guests. And like just with us, selfishly running our own podcast, I really enjoy interviewing different people from different backgrounds because there's all these little nuggets of knowledge that I pick up that I can apply to my own personal life, my business. What was one of the most impactful things for you as a person and a business owner that you were able to take away from being a Bigger Pockets host for over 2 years?
There's this scene in The Matrix where Neo gets like loaded up into the chair, and then they like load up kung fu in his mind, and he's just like within a minute he goes, he's like, I know kung fu now. And that's really how I felt after doing 200 plus interviews, like every freaking Wednesday. Those were the days I would shoot 2 or 3 shows. I was just talking to like the smartest, most insane people, and literally getting access to the brightest and best minds in real estate. And so it just accelerated my own knowledge. Like, I feel like I could do anything now if I put my mind to it, if I really wanted to. I've said this earlier, like when I want something, I'm going to go for it. And just being able to like get direct access to a lot of people that have become friends to me, Pace Morby, Jamil. I've gotten to interview Alex Hormozy. I've gotten to interview Barbara Corcoran. Like, I get really like 1 hour of incredibly focused time with people who ordinarily I would never have access to in my entire life. And that's something that I never took for granted in Bigger Pockets. And I've met a lot of good friends and a lot of cool people as a result. And it's really been a dream come true to just call some of the people that I know my friends, because I'm like, I can't believe Bigger Pockets enabled all of this for me. Interestingly, I mean, it's part BP, right? But like, I had my YouTube channel. Like that's honestly my main thing. My main thing was the Raw Built channel. And that's where I taught more people than ever before. And I think BP coming in just kind of put a little bit of gas on that fire. And I've been very thankful to always put everything I have into my YouTube channel. So now that even BP, even though it's not around, I still have my main audience, which is all the Raw Built community. And, I just get to spend more time making content. Like, the whole goal of all of this, the whole reason I did Bigger Pockets was I just like teaching people at mass. And, on the Rob Bell channel, I have 275,000 subs, something like that. I don't know, somewhere in that region. And then with BP, it's like I'm literally talking to millions of people and helping someone have that light bulb moment every episode, because there are so many times that I listened to Bigger Pockets where I was just like, oh my God, I just made $1 million, like just with the little nuggets that I would shoot from guests. And so knowing that I had that opportunity to do that for someone else time and time again, it's like my lifetime achievement. And podcasts are great. What y'all are doing here is amazing. Like, never take for granted how much you can change the life of like just one person, but you multiply that times thousands or tens of thousands, and it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I love that you say it's like that Kung Fu upload, because the most important part about that was when he was told, show me, right? And so you can learn all you want about real estate from all these people and everything, but then it comes down to show me.
Yeah.
And not only show me, but show the people behind you. I mean, Zach talks all the time about, it's about bringing along the next people with you. And so, but you have to get that knowledge to be able to help people along.
Show me, aka take action, right? Like,
Yep.
I think that's where we get into the point of like, listen, you can listen to all the podcasts, you can read all the blogs, you can buy all the courses, but nothing is going to replace making your first offer, getting it accepted, closing on your first property, and actually getting punched in the face by a rental,
Most people leave that part out, but it happens, right? It's not uphill.
It does. I mean, there's not a single thing that I've done. I mean, we were catching up before this, and I was telling you about a flip that's kicking my butt right now. I mean, I wouldn't take it back. Obviously, my life would be easier if I could, but I mean, that mistake or that bad deal that I bought will make me so much more money in the future as a result from being able to just avoid all the dumb mistakes that I made on that deal.
Yeah, that's such an important, like you mentioned, like nuggets of knowledge from podcasts, and like every deal that goes bad is just a learning experience. I mean, it's just That's something, yes, if you apply those lessons or if you apply those nuggets of knowledge, it only takes a handful, right? Like you don't need this blueprint. So many people, especially starting out, they just want this blueprint of like, tell me exactly what to do. And like, you got to figure it out. But if you can just take a few nuggets of knowledge from these different pieces of information and books, a podcast, or a bad deal, whatever the case is, like that's all making you a more sophisticated and savvy investor long term. But you actually have to apply all of those. Rob, I promise we're going to let you get out of here. But before that, tell the audience about like all the cool things you're working on now in the short-term space. Tell us about, where to find you, and let's talk about like if people want to like continue down the Rob path of seeing the light of short-term rentals, where can they find you?
Sure. Well, obviously, you can always find me on the Rob Built channel. That is my main platform. Like I said, you can also interact with me, chat with me. I don't have a VA in my Instagram inbox. It's me. If you ever hear me chat, it's always me. But the big thing that I'm working on right now is for the past 3-4 years, I've had a really successful Airbnb education program, a mentorship program. And it's kind of crazy to say this. I think this is breaking news, but I have basically changed the model of that to be a membership. And eventually I'll launch that, but you can't even get it now if you wanted to. So if you want free education, this is my goal here. Go to hostcamp.com. I've got free courses on there. I've got free guides, templates, calculators, truthfully, things that I have charged a decent amount for in the past. It is all free right now. I've got a blog on there. I've got a forum on there, and I'll be launching a membership there in the next month or two. But for now, it's all free. So if you want to learn Airbnb 101, if you want discounts on vendors, we're talking like AirDNA, PriceLabs, Guest. I've got discounts to literally every like Airbnb vendor out there. You just want to like get a 20, 30, 40% off of stuff. You can just go to hostcamp.com, hang out. There's a forum, life pro tip. I'm putting a lot of energy into that forum. And so every single person that asks the question on that forum, I will personally answer for like the next month. So if you want to ask me a personal question, the forum is the way to do that. And it's all free.
That's awesome. Huge resource for anyone that is interested in the content you're producing, short-term rentals, and just maximizing their business. All right, let's do a quick fire round of just short-term rental questions. Rob, try to answer these is, 1 or 2 sentences.
Got it.
Just quick advice.
Loaded.
All right. First-time investor. When do they know if they should consider short-term rental versus another asset class?
If cash flow is what they're seeking, then I think short-term rentals are the pretty clear answer there, because most other rentals are going to be lower on the cash flow side. So if you're strapped for cash and you're trying to supercharge that on the front end, I'd recommend Airbnb.
Awesome. And Adam, feel free to chime in here. I know we're just throwing this on the go. But...
Also, if you want to save a lot of money on taxes with the cost segregation report and you're a high-income earner, that would also be another huge use case for short-term rental.
Well, that another hour to our interview.
So cost segregations are basically this tax loophole.
We cover that all the time, and in lieu of being a REI pro, you can, if you're self-managing, that kind of removes the hour requirement, so you can essentially take the cost seg on a short-term rental. We recommend it all the time to newer investors that are high-income earners if you can't qualify for REI pro. Rob, financing. How do you finance a short-term rental?
Typically, I'll do a DSCR loan. So debt service coverage ratio loan. They will use the income of your property, the projections of it, to qualify you for the loan. That has been mostly how I've scaled. And I also do a lot of creative financing too, subject to seller financing.
Love it. What would you say the downsides are of short-term rentals?
Downsides are seasonality. So if you want very consistent income, short-term rentals may not be for you, because there are high seasons, there are low seasons, and there are in-between seasons. Also, much higher maintenance and management, and much more finicky guests that will blow up your phone if they're unhappy. A lot of people management. That's probably the biggest one. If you don't like people, short-term rentals are going to be a tough one to survive in.
Do you recommend self-managing or outsourcing management for short-term rentals?
Yeah, I teach people how to self-manage. I mean, I think there's probably a use case for it on the property management, but I'm such a fan of the short-term rental loophole and just like not paying taxes that I always tell people at least try to self-manage so you can qualify for the STR loophole. And then, if you want to switch over after that, I suppose I'll allow it. But there's just so much more money, I think, in self-managing. And a lot more tiers, but still more money.
Certainly. Yeah, because management could be significantly more. Like, that can eat up a lot of your cash flow, right? If you're talking 20, 30, 40%. But
You can wipe up your tears with your cash flow.
I wipe up my tears with my $100 bills all the time. I'm just like,
best markets, if you had to recommend a handful of markets or even just one or two, if people are open.
well, you have to buy my course for that, which is free over at hostcamp.com. I like Austin. I like Houston. I'm actually mostly going to be investing in Houston, probably moving forward. I think Shenandoah is great. I like Joshua Tree with some caveats if you're going to do high-end stuff there. But for the most part, I'm a big fanatic on national parks. So Yosemite, Smoky Mountains, Grand Canyon, Joshua Tree, Shenandoah, anything in that world is always going to be a pretty successful place. And if you can't find a national park market, try to find a smaller state park. The competition is very low in those markets.
Do you always use single-family houses as short-term rentals, or is there a market to do condominiums and other things like that as short-term rentals?
I mostly do single-family residences, mostly because the appreciation overall is probably going to be a little higher there. And I don't like that the bylaws of condos can kind of write you out of being able to use it as a short-term rental. So I'm always going to advocate for an STR. And you don't have shared walls, so you don't have to worry about upsetting neighbors and all that stuff.
Most important piece of furniture you've put in your short-term rental beyond the normal stuff, normal amenities of couches? Do you like what's an important thing people want to think about normally?
I mean, this is probably going to be in that basic category, but I think probably the most important investment you can make is in the mattress. Ultimately, people are paying you to sleep at their property or sleep at your property, and can't tell you how many people have reached out months, years afterwards and saying, "Oh my gosh, you had the best bed I've ever slept in. What is that mattress that I slept on? Please tell me." And you have to keep in mind, like, your reviews are going to always be written by the person that booked that property. The person that booked that property is probably the person that is going to be sleeping in the master bedroom. So if you're going to splurge on one set of bedding and bed, make your master bedroom the best, because those are the people that will write you the review.
That's huge. All right, last question. Let's you talked about dealing with people. I'm interested to hear the crazy guest story that you had at one of your rentals. For example, I had this group of people at one of my rentals that one of my short-term rentals that came out, that they run this like network of, real estate podcasts online or something like that, and ended up snowmobiling and trashing the house later that night. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Okay. So one time I had guests that wouldn't check out of the property. Checkouts at 10, and our cleaners kept knocking on the door, like, "Hello, is anyone in there?" Called us, "Hey, they're not like coming out." Well, guests finally wake up. They're angry. They come out with the gun and they pull it on my cleaners, and my cleaners are like, "Yep. So they just pulled a gun on us." And when we confronted the guests about it, the guests were like, "What are they talking about? I don't know what they're talking about. We didn't, what gun? What's a gun?" So yeah, obviously we reported them to the platform.
So did they eventually leave? Did you just like, how did
They did leave. I also had a guest one time that left the slider door open at my property in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and Mama and her 2 cubs broke into the property.
Ooh.
Actually rummaged through the house, broke a vase. I still left them 5 stars though. The bears were great. They left in a better condition than the guests.
How much did you have to pay the cleaner after they got a gun pulled on them?
You know what? They didn't charge back, thankfully. But honestly, like, if they wanted to quit, I would have been like, "I get it. I get it."
That's fair.
Well, this has been exceptional, Rob. I know we held you long, but lots of key information. This is fantastic. If anyone is interested to follow Rob, make sure to check out hostcon.com. And Rob, we sincerely thank you for your time.
Host camp.
I
mean, HostCon, you can check that website in about 9 months. That's my conference in Houston, Texas. But yeah, hostcamp.com.
Sweet. Thanks so much, Rob.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Rob. Really appreciate it. Don't forget to check out our stuff at renttoretirement.com. You'll see short-term rental every once in a while there. And if you have any questions that you'd like to have answered in future episodes, or just to tell your story, email podcast@renttoretirement. That's podcast@renttoretirement. Really appreciate the time you spent educating yourself today. We'll talk to you on the next episode.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Thanks for watching the Rent to Retirement YouTube channel. Check out some of our other videos, like this one, or this one here.